Today's episode is an interview with Dr. Michelle Gordon, founder of the Menopause Movement. And she is so interesting. Her backstory is crazy. You name it, she's done it. So we talk about a lot, and I so appreciate her openness and vulnerability. She bears all, if you will. She is basically a surgeon turned entrepreneur. And she has an amazing program that helps women who are suffering from menopause. But she talks about her journey from a very young child to where she is today. She talks about being gay. She talks about being an atheist. She talks about being the mother of a very sick child. She talks about going to college, to medical school, at the late age of 31, I think is when she went. She talks about waking up at age 49, 50, miserable with menopause, and very unhappy in what she's doing in her profession. And she opens up about how she figured out through learning about limiting beliefs and mindset that she ended up where she was at midlife because of a comment and an experience that she had from a very young age. And that happens to many of us. So I think this is an amazing and very interesting and educational, I will say, episode about Michelle's life. And you really learn who she is and what her purpose that she's now living is. And it's so beautiful, such a beautiful interview. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the interview. Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Lives. And today I have with me a person who has been a biz buddy for about 2 years now. We met at an online event, Dr. Michelle Gordon. Welcome, Michelle.
Well, hi. Thanks for having me, Lori.
Yes, and she's got a great voice. So I'm excited to just sit here and listen to her, first of all. And she's got amazing community she's built, and she knows about menopause because she is 56.
Yeah.
So we can talk all day long about that, because actually I was at the gynecologist yesterday. So I had not been for a while because of COVID. But
Right.
I love Michelle's story because she is a surgeon, I believe a retired surgeon now,
Yeah.
who has moved into the online space to build her business. And she has a really great backstory, and I can't wait to dig in to learn more about her, because a lot of her backstory I was just learning about in the pre-interview. And so, yes, so let's, tell us about you and who you are, and what kind of got you started into the whole online space.
Right on. So I'm Dr. Michelle Gordon, and it was, I would say, 2014. Uh, I was looking for a solution. I'd gone to some like personal development conferences and trying to find myself, and I built this practice, this surgical practice that was meeting my financial needs, but I kept thinking, is there something else? This is not, there's just, it just never felt like I was doing the right thing. And I felt like I was being called to do something more. And as menopause started to kind of rear her ugly head with me, I gained about 50 pounds, and I started really just disliking the body I was in, the thoughts I was having, all of these things about myself. It was just really beating down on myself. And I had so much, just my low self-esteem. I was just really down and low. So I eaten, not eaten. Oh, I'd eaten myself into a frenzy, I guess. But I also, it was, I was always thinking about food. I mean, it was crazy. I was craving food, and I had no idea why I felt like that. And then out of the blue, I would feel like I was embarrassed, like these flushes would come up, and it like felt like how it felt when I was a kid, and I didn't know what was going on. So I'm like, okay. So I put two and two together. I'm like, okay, this must be menopause. And I'm like, well, if it's this disruptive, why didn't I know about it?
Yeah.
I mean,
So you
I
were
mean,
like 49, 50. So you were just around
yeah,
the, yeah.
yeah. It was average age of menopause is 51, and so as a surgeon, that's a high stakes profession. That's a high performance profession. Whenever you open somebody up, you've got their lives in their lives in
Yeah.
your hands. And so it's a really high stakes profession. And what was happening is I was having trouble recalling certain things, like names of arteries or names of medications that I prescribed all the time. And then I wasn't sleeping. I was waking up with racing thoughts,
Mm.
and I just started putting it all together. And so I have lots of access to doctors because I'm a doctor. And so my friends are doctors. My wife is a doctor. And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Oh, it's probably a menopause. You got to suffer through it." And I was like, "What?" And then I went to my friend who's a gynecologist, and she said, "Yeah, it's menopause. You got to suffer through it. You want the patch?" And I was like, "Ugh." So I tried some bioidentical hormones and I got a period. I was like, I said,
I know
you
that's
know,
the one good thing about menopause. I don't miss that one
yeah.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is because I had such premenstrual pain, I had been on the pill for years, just a continuous pill. And I started worrying about my weight gain. And so I stopped the pill suddenly and I got a huge fibroid. So the fibroid went all the way up to my sternum. I mean,
Mm.
it took up my whole abdomen. And I ended up I didn't have to have surgery, thank God. I just had a uterine artery ablation. But before that, of course, I had to have an endometrial biopsy. And if you've given birth, you kind of know what that feels like because, having a baby and uterine contractions and all those things, they really hurt. But man, when somebody takes a stylet and scrapes the inside of your womb, man, that's pain like
Yeah,
I
I had one probably like 3 years ago and I
yeah,
fainted. I'm a
yeah.
fainter.
It's just
I fainted. I was like,
I just
that's all.
screamed as soon as
It's
it was
like
over.
it's a good way to like get people to stop doing what they're doing. I found.
Yeah, no,
But
I don't
yeah,
think I've ever fainted, but
yeah.
yeah, so that was fun. So I had that done, and but I was still like, I was like, what? Well, is this menopause? What is this? And so since my colleagues couldn't tell me anything, I was like, you know what? I've got, I'm smart. I can read journals. And so I went to Google and I was like, well, maybe somebody's got a course because I'm a lifetime learner. And I was like, well, maybe there's a course I can buy. And so I started searching the internet for courses and I couldn't find any. And as a matter of fact, all of the information on Google was like disjointed and weird and it didn't make any sense. And there was no framework. And so I
Mhm.
started reading scholarly articles. I started reading nutrition textbooks. I started reading exercise physiology textbooks. And I started and I read endocrinology books. And I started understanding, I made myself a menopause expert to understand what was happening with me. And then what I did was I created kind of like an experiment with myself. And I just wrote down the things that I was doing that worked and I threw away the things that weren't working. And I put it in a framework and it's called the Meno system. And it worked for me. And not only did I lose 50 pounds, I started sleeping through the night and the symptoms just stopped running my life. And
Yeah, and was
menopause
that
started.
brain fog that what you were experiencing, like the forgetting
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah,
That's
that's brain fog and that's related to a lot of things. A lot of it has to do with lack of sleep.
mm.
And lack of
I had
sleep
hot
has
flashes that were
yeah.
keeping me waking up multiple times a night.
Yeah, and hot flashes have to do a lot with diet. And so
Mm.
that's why I spent so much time on nutrition. And
Yeah,
it's
red wine gave me
mhm,
them. I
red
figured
wine
out.
and
Like,
chocolate.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The favorite things that yeah.
So I read some really great books and I kind of put it all together and I started understanding that fat's not the enemy and I started really understanding the role seed oils play in our lack of nutrition and the diabetes epidemic. And so if anybody gets anything from this podcast, it is don't eat seed oils, and those are canola, corn, cottonseed, safflower, soy, and sunflower. And if you have those in your life, get rid of them right now because they're
Mm,
poison.
mm. Now, isn't there an avocado oil? Is that
Avocado
okay?
oil is great. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I
It
think I
has
have a new salad dressing that has that in it.
yeah,
I'm
it
like,
has a
okay.
high smoke point. So you
Hmm.
can like fry in it if you want to. Peanut oil
Mm,
is also okay. So the rule of thumb that I learned from Dr. Kate Shanahan, and she wrote a couple of books that are pretty popular. One is called Deep Nutrition, and the other is The Fat Burn Fix.
hmm.
And actually, I had her on my podcast, the Menopause Movement podcast, not too long ago. So that was pretty awesome.
How
But anyway,
exciting. Full circle.
yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah. So well, I reached out to her. I said, listen, your work has changed my life and the life of my students. And so I'd love to have you on the podcast. But anyway, so the rule of thumb is nature doesn't make bad fats. And if you're eating things like Crisco is manufactured from a side, like a byproduct of other industries, corn oil, corn syrup, by
Manufactured, like it's not natural,
manufactured.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's,
Mhm.
yeah. So they go through this process where part of it is they're solid like a plastic.
Mm.
And then they turn it so it's not, it's all chemical manipulation. But butter just, comes out as butter. Now, I'm not there are some arguments about the milk protein casein and what it can do to tumors in our body and things like that. So if you don't like milk, I'm plus minus dairy. Dairy, perfect food for a baby cow. Fermented dairy, maybe it's better for us and okay. But when it comes to starting to talk about like dairy, then there's a lot of belief that gets thrown in. So I try
Yeah.
to steer away from that. But if you just stay with the premise that nature doesn't make bad fats,
Mm.
you can look
Right.
at palm oil, avocado
Nuts. Yeah, nuts are good.
most
Yeah.
nut oils, but you'd have to be careful because you don't want to
I'm
cook.
talking about just nuts though.
Oh
But
yeah, nuts
yeah.
too, but
Yeah.
but you want to be careful with like cooking with like a low smoke point oil, like sesame oil, because they'll break down and then they become toxic. But the
Mm.
biggest issue with seed oils is that the seed oils, the reason why they're so ubiquitous or everywhere is because they're odorless, tasteless, and cheap. And so every
Mm.
time you go to get French fries at a fast food restaurant, except for Five Guys, they're going to be coated in this oil. And over time, so because your body needs fats to build our hormones, fats are the building block of hormones. When you're giving your body these crappy fats, then it's going to make your menopause much worse because you're going to have crappy fats to build your hormones from. And I've put that all together just over the last few years.
Yeah. And so you're clearly very knowledgeable and you have your own personal experience, which, oftentimes, and you and I have learned this through our work and in the whole mindset space, but, we follow the path because that's meant to be our future usually,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So you have to go through the lessons first before you can be a giver of what your lessons were that will help other people.
Without
So
question.
yeah, yeah. And so you've gotten into a lot of the mindset work. Yeah. And we were talking about how we met 2 years ago. And I feel like and me too, we've both changed so much as we've
Yeah.
explored more deeply into our beliefs and what's limited us in the past.
Mhm.
And I think particularly when we get to midlife and we feel like we're still searching, we even have more work to do, because there's so much past there that is coming with us.
Yeah.
So I would love to know, because you talk about all these symptoms, how much of it do you think was menopause versus how much of it was being misaligned, like that you were
Mm.
forcing this, round peg in a square hole, if you
Yeah,
will?
so that's a great question, and it's hard to say because menopause is such an opportunity to make this the best time of your life. I mean, like
Mm,
you make the rest your best, right?
mhm.
And and we have this opportunity in this during this disruption to really rethink what's important to us. And through my life, I've had many opportunities and many disruptions. My son was, really ill as a child, as a 21-month-old. He had cancer. And that was a disruption where I was able to just quit my job and focus on him. And then I went into medical school and,
Was
uh,
that because of your son being ill? Because you
well,
you started at 30, I think I
I started
saw. Yeah.
31.
Oh,
So I had
31.
always,
Wow.
so I had this, well, you want to go into that
Yeah,
belief
I want you to
story?
go,
Okay.
yeah, go back into
So,
your whole
all
back,
right.
like when you were 12.
So well let's go back to so when I was a little girl, and I tell this story a lot, so if you've heard it before, then I apologize. But so I was a little girl, and my mother, of course, I'm a little girl, I want to please my mom. And there was a time when we were doing a guided meditation, actually, with one of our mentors. And this story came back to me, and I was like, oh, that's why I haven't made any money online. And it was so poignant to me. And so, like, I'd been trying to make money online for several years. And I was like, why do I keep sabotaging myself? What the heck's going on here? And so I had
And
this
that, yeah,
memory.
like successful, like me too, like,
Yeah.
vice president, six figures, lots of, everything success in that
Well,
space. And then you kind of transfer everything to online. You're like,
why haven't I made multiple seven figures
The
already?
best
And that's,
teacher.
well, but it's really funny because my surgical practice was multiple seven figures. And so I was like, well, I know how to run a business. Let's just move this on. But it's a very different sort of business. And it requires a lot of persistence because obviously if it were easy, everyone would be successful at it. But getting back to the story, so at 5 years old, I had this memory of myself at 5 years old. My mom had two brothers who were doctors. One was her brother, one was her brother-in-law. And she made some comment like, those guys are rich. They're doctors, they're rich. And so my 5-year-old brain translated that into, please your mom, become a doctor, make money. The only way you can make money is to be a doctor. And it's really interesting because I didn't enter medical school until I was 31. I had gotten married, gone to college. My son had been sick, broken up with my husband, and
What'd you study in college?
biology and physical chemistry, a
Hmm.
lot of STEM. So I did community college first because I was kind of a slacker in high school. And then, I like high scored everything in community college. And then I went to this small school of science and engineering called Harvey Mudd College. And that's in Southern California. They compete with Caltech and MIT for students. So I transferred in there. And I'm still probably the only woman to ever have a baby while a student at that school. It's a really tough school. And and so my son, I took a job. I was working in IT in Los Angeles, and I took this job, and then my son like stopped walking, eating, and drinking, and we got him diagnosed with this really rare form of leukemia that was completely in his central nervous system. Got him
Mm.
treated. He got better. My marriage broke up. Thank God. And I started, and I had started thinking that I had to go to medical school. I was like, yeah, I was working, but I couldn't hold down a job because I had to take care of this sick kid. And I just had to miss a lot of work. And that was before the days of work from home, right? This was in the 90s.
But
Yeah.
I wouldn't think being a surgeon would meet those needs because that's something
Well,
that you
I
have
wasn't a
to.
sur I mean, I wasn't a surgeon then, right? I was thinking
Right.
about medical school. So I was in my
Oh,
20s,
okay.
my late
Going to school.
20s.
Right. Hmm.
Yeah. And so the thing is that so this program was running from my 5-year-old self up
Hmm.
until, my through my marriage and through the breakup of my marriage. And I just kept thinking that if I could be a doctor, I could make a lot of money. If I can be a doctor, I can make a lot of money. And so, long story short, I became a doctor. I made a lot of money. And it wasn't fulfilling. And,
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
yeah, and it just I enjoyed it, but it is really the way that healthcare is in America. If a doctor makes a mistake, the doctor is demonized. If a doctor wants something done, the gateways to getting something done is through for-profit insurance companies. And before the 70s, insurance companies weren't for profit and everything was different. And so it's really just changed the whole scope. And with COVID, when COVID hit, and I was on the front lines of that here in New York, and seeing people die every single day and seeing what was happening, and everyone with COVID needing to be put on their bellies and needing to be vented and needing dialysis. And I mean, I was putting in 10, 15 central lines and hemodialysis catheters a day. And I was coming home, stripping down in the garage, and I
Mm.
was like, I don't want this life. And I said, I've saved some money. I know my online business will work because there's just so many women who don't know what's happening. This menopause is so disruptive. And I've also like seen this programming, and this programming no longer works. I mean, I can make money anywhere.
Hmm.
And I started
Yeah.
seeing money as a source, as just an energy, and
Hmm.
more being in alignment with who I'm supposed to be rather than like trading my time for money. And
Hmm.
so I trusted the universe to help me put together a plan, and I burned my ships because I let my malpractice go.
Yeah. Yeah. You burned your
So
ships.
yeah, so that
Yeah.
was back in July of 2020, and I've been
Yeah. I
I've
just recently read that story again because I've heard the quote, but I didn't know the story behind it. And I thought that was very interesting. So
yeah.
I don't know. I don't think you were in the hot seat group that I was in the last time we were at the live
Mhm.
EBD event, but I had made that decision at that event to quit my corporate job finally for good. And the thing that came up for me, and I don't know if this came up for you, but I realized through, I mean, this was like a 3-day processing of I need to do this. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, I can't. Oh, what's going to happen? My world's going to fall apart if I leave this corporate job that's been my security blanket. And what came up finally was, what message am I sending to the universe? Like, I'm telling the universe that I doubt my path. And that's, yeah. And by jumping and knowing the net's going to be there,
Right.
that is, I'm saying, I'm putting a stake in the ground, and I'm saying, this is who I am, this is what I'm meant to do, and I am not afraid. And yeah, that's what you
Yeah. I
did.
mean, the fears
So
still come up. The thing
sure,
about
yeah.
fear is Mother Teresa, I think, said it best. You're going to feel certain things. You got to do it anyway.
Hmm.
And so the thing about fear is it's normal to, have self-doubt and fear, but action action is the thing that will take the
Hmm.
fear away. I mean, I've found that the more I put action onto things, the better it is. The more I take action. And for me, what's happened with my business is we've completely, over the last 6 months, we've just completely broken it and rebuilt it. And it's super exciting because we've got several offers that are not only, that are going to change women's lives, but they're affordable. And so, we're not trying to break the bank. We're not trying, it's not like this weird, coaching thing, but our first thing starts at under $30.
Hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's go back to, because I love the whole story thing. I'm just a
Sure.
really, because that's what people like to hear. They want to,
Absolutely.
I think, because that's where they emotionally connect. So go back to, because you mentioned your wife.
Hmm.
So you are gay. And so I want to know how that ties into you discovering yourself. Did you have, like you
I
said, you
mean,
came out at a young age.
I
Like,
did. I mean, I
yeah.
knew I knew that I had attraction. Actually, I was probably younger than that. I had attraction. So when I was a little girl, my mom put me in ballet, and we lived next, we had a group of friends together, and there was a girl, Angela. And Angela, if you're watching this, I've already told you this before, but I used to think that Angela and I were going to grow up and get married. And
Oh,
I was, 5 or 6, and we went our separate ways, and then Facebook reconnected us. And I I I remember when I reconnected with her, I felt so like, ugh, because I had, I mean, I had always loved her, and I still have like quite a fondness for her now, in a, obviously in a more platonic way. And I can't say that it wasn't platonic when I was a child, because I didn't know anything about sex when I was, 6 years old, 7 years old. But I used to say, well, when Angela and I grow up, we're going to grow up and get married. We're going to be married, and it just was felt completely normal to me.
yeah. And do
Um,
you think there's like a soul connection there? I mean, there's got to be some kind of a
well,
connection that I think goes deeper than.
perhaps, perhaps. I mean, we went very, very different paths as
Hmm.
early as junior high.
Hmm.
So, and we just really never really reconnected until I reached out to her on Facebook, and then we took a trip. She lives in Seattle area, and took a trip to Seattle. My brother lives there, and we just hung out and we just talked. We talked about, being a kid together, and it
Mm.
was it was really it was really nice to reconnect with her. And so that always felt normal. And then I remember, like, in the 70s, maybe, there was Time magazine, and it was all about like the military, and the woman who was trying to keep her position with the military, because she was married to a woman, or she was with a woman or something, and the military tried to, they like stripped her of rank and stuff. So I remember that in Time magazine, and thinking, oh, that's me. Interesting.
Hmm.
But I still like boys. So, and so I would date boys, and it was, but I come also, to kind of, and there's not an overshare, but just to kind of give a little more background. I was really brutally sexually assaulted as a child, repeatedly. And so, it's hard to say chicken and egg, right? Maybe I
Mm.
just found women
Yeah.
more, girls more safe.
Was
And
that, you said repeated? Was that just a
yeah,
one
it was
time?
like,
It,
it was, no, it was
oh,
incest. It was
oh,
incest.
wow.
And
Mm.
yeah, so a lot of things. And not, this is not to, I've dealt with it, and these are
Hmm.
things that just happened. And for me, if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am. And so
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
I've dealt with it and I'm okay with it. I had some issues as a child, as a teenager. I ran away from home, and I've lived a lot of adversity,
Hmm.
and I've had a lot of resilience. And I've learned the meaning of resilience throughout my life because, I was I ran away from home, and then I lived in foster care. And I mean, I've been, there's just a lot of, there's a lot of stories. I
Well,
moved
then you
15.
said you like what I thought was really interesting, because that could screw with your mind, is that, and I don't know if it's because your mom was found Jesus, but you found Jesus.
Oh yeah.
And
So
then that can yeah, they don't really,
yeah.
Jesus isn't really, or the people who follow Jesus aren't real accepting of.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up in southeastern Washington State, and in the town that I grew up, there's a church on every corner. And so I was raised Catholic. My mom was Catholic, and there definitely had to have been a priest involved in some of my molestation, because I had a recurring dream of a guy in a black suit who came and killed my whole family, except for me, and I hid by it next door to the neighbor's tree. And for me, I never put that all together. It was this recurring dream for the longest time, and I didn't put it together actually until I saw the movie about the priests, and I thought,
Mm,
oh, it probably had a priest. Probably there was a priest involved too. So there was just a lot of like weird sexual stuff in my
mm,
family, and then growing up and whatever. I mean, that it's just what
yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
We live in a patriarchy, and especially back in the late 60s, early 70s, anything female was fodder for a male, for male sexuality, at least by my experience. I think we've come a little bit further away, but we still get catcalls.
Yeah.
So
I was watching, my husband loves to watch Forensic Files, and I was watching an episode last night, and it just kind of like struck me, because I think it happens more than we realize.
it's very common.
It
Yeah.
really does. And I think there are memories that some are just like people have blocked out, that they don't even
Well, yeah,
realize.
and the other thing is that, I mean, it's probably closer to 1 in 3 women in America, or girls, have been abused in on some fashion.
Hmm.
And the problem is that there's the whole issue of victim shaming and belief, not believing that they're telling the truth. And so when I remembered about, I have one of my older brothers who's now passed away, so I feel free to talk about it. Was the culprit with me, and when I came out and told my family about it when I was like 15, nobody believed me. And that's when I ran away. I was like, well, nobody's
Mm.
going to believe me. And so then I went through the foster care, and moved like 15 times in a year. And it was,
That happened to my cousin. It came
yeah,
up in she had a because she was having trouble with relationships. She was
yeah,
not like, and she was not, she's never been married. She's never been married. She ended up having a son through artificial insemination, but and she's heterosexual, but every relationship that she would have would fail for some reason. And so she went
hmm,
to get help on it. And it came up that her uncle had sexually abused her. And it split the family, because
yeah,
everybody thought she was lying. She had been coerced. And then my aunt said, I always had this weird feeling. And it was like, yes, validation finally.
right,
That's very
yeah.
hard, very
And it's
hard.
hard. I mean, I think my mom knew things were going on, but she didn't. She was young. I mean, she was really young when she had her first child, and she had been abused as a youngster
Mm.
too, by a stepbrother who said he was in love with her, and just a lot of, it was not a stepbrother, it was like a half brother. So just a lot of real weird incest stuff in my family. And it's my father admitted to having sex with his sister, and he just thought it was normal, and just so a lot of really weird shit that people just turn their heads because that's normal. And
What's interesting is I had somebody recently on the podcast, and it hasn't aired yet, but it'll air soon, is about ancestral patterns,
mm,
and how you carry the patterns forward. And
yeah.
that's very interesting. It sounds like, a lot in your family, but I wonder how far back that
Yeah,
goes.
well, that's so this kind of ties back to going into Christianity, because I really felt like Christianity was going to be the answer for me. Like this whole, I wanted to break the sins of the father. I was like, this is not going to, I'm not going to carry this forward.
Mhm.
So Christianity served me well. I won't say it didn't. Throughout Christianity, I learned a lot about myself. And so I went in, And, the first thing they said was, you can't be gay kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. And I went and I did I did a whole like ex-gay thing in Southern, I moved to Southern California, specifically so that I could go through this program. And, I ended up getting married and all these things. And I wouldn't say that I didn't have a meaningful relationship with my husband before the relationship died. And I wouldn't say that we didn't have a sexual, connection, because we had a son together. But I just realized at the end of that relationship that, that probably wasn't me. And
Did
trying
you
to,
feel when you got married, like, so I'm heterosexual, but when I got married to my first husband, I felt like I was making a mistake because I was in
yeah.
love with somebody else. And sometimes I say it's kind of like being gay, I think, even though I'm not gay. It's like, there's something wrong when you're walking down that aisle. And I was
I
just
mean,
wondering if you
it's
had
hard
any of
to
those.
it's hard to say, because like my first lover, who was a woman, was 20 years older than me. The first significant lover, who was a woman, was 20 years older than me. And I had this kind of epiphany while we were together, and I was like 20 or something. And the thought that I had, or the story I chose to tell myself, was, I'm doing things with her that I should be doing with my husband. And so I ended up ending that relationship and going and doing this whole like ex-gay like
Were you
program.
married at the time
No,
when you
no,
had that
no,
relationship? Oh, so you were
no.
thinking
This was
my
I
future
was like
husband.
20. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So my
Okay.
future husband. Yeah,
I should be
it
doing
wasn't
this.
an
Yeah. Yeah.
affair. Yeah, this is
So
like,
maybe
oh, this is
logic
something my
brain was telling you to do. Yeah.
who knows,
Yeah. That's
And so
crazy.
then
Yeah.
I went through that whole program, and I have to say that I was really dedicated to that program. And
So is
I
it like
learned
kind of a Alcoholics Anonymous, but you're fixing
no,
your gayness or?
no, it wasn't like that. It was a
Yeah.
lot of education, and it was
Okay.
really a guy. I mean, just like we do, right? We go through something, and we show others how to do what we did if they want it bad enough, right? It's a
Mm.
shortcut. And so it was a guy who had made it through himself, married to a woman very happily, 4 children, just had chosen to not be gay anymore, which is certainly, I suppose, possible for some people, although I do think that sexuality is fixed at birth.
Yeah, I agree.
But or, somebody like me who I mean, I'm really probably pansexual or bisexual if I were to look at it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm married to a woman, and I'm dedicated to her, and I'm faithful to her and all that. So,
Yeah, I feel I heard this once and it's so true. It sounds like to me is there's like a spectrum, right?
yeah.
And extreme heterosexual, extreme homosexual, and then there's you're on this. It's a linear, and some people are in the middle, and some people
Yeah.
lean one way or lean the other. And I thought that was a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So during this program, I learned a couple of things. I've had so much bitterness about my sexual abuse, and I learned that forgiveness was for me.
Yeah.
And you don't need God to forgive. You just have to let things go and realize that there's a lesson everywhere. And so that was really, really good for me at that age. I was 21, and I realized that when I forgive, I release that person from having control in my life. And I was able to then walk into my power. And that was helpful. That was helpful for when my marriage broke up, and that, because I married him, and I was really upset we broke up. And I really hope that God would perform a miracle and get us back together. And that wasn't in God's plan.
Yeah.
And so, then throughout medical school, and if we're going to talk about spirituality, I after my marriage broke up, I was never unfaithful to him. I was, I stayed faithful, and I was like, well, I guess I'll go back to women, and dated some women. And
Well, yeah, the dating pool is open, right?
yeah, yeah. And the problem is that I kept on getting into relationships that where I was being yelled at or abused or whatever. And it wasn't until I met Valerie, my current wife, and things were just easy, and it didn't hurt at all.
Mm.
We just had to work through things.
Yeah.
And
And
that
how long have you
was
been together?
since 2005.
Okay, so this is before
Yeah.
your transition into the space you're in
Right.
now, and
As soon as, yeah. So as soon, right. We met right when I finished my residency. and we got together pretty quick after that, and we've been together ever since. And so, yeah, we got married in
The
2013 when
real life version of Grey's Anatomy.
I suppose. I mean, so yeah, so that was really interesting. I mean, in life, right? I mean, if you want to look at life, there's ways to look at life. Life is a series of self-discovery, and I truly believe that we're here as spirit. We are, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We chose to come here to have this experience, and we're going to go
Mhm.
back to spirit when we're done.
Yep.
And so we are on, I believe really strongly that we are on a spiritual journey. And so for me, part of my spiritual journey involved atheism. And for the longest time, I only believed in science. And when my son got sick with cancer, even though I thought I was, giving him everything, the right things to give him, when my son got sick with cancer, I was really upset. And I was a vegetarian at the time, and I was like, well, okay, if this little perfect baby can get cancer, then I can eat whatever the hell I want. And I moved back to eating meat. And then with the extremism in the church about gayness, when you look at the Bible, when you look at the words of Jesus as they're recorded by the men who wrote them several years after he died, Jesus never passed judgment on gay people.
Mm.
Never once.
Yeah.
Jesus just said, love people. The
Mhm.
kingdom of God is within you.
Mhm.
And so as I started back into trying to have a high performance lifestyle, I realized I had to meditate. I realized that meditation was crucial to focus. And I recently read a book that said for every minute you meditate, you get 9 minutes back in your day. Now,
Wow. That's
now, of course, that's a
great.
law of diminishing returns, right? So you're not going to
Yes.
get 9 hours back, but it's just really crucial to train your brain. And so as I learned that, I ended up back on a spiritual journey, and I read this book called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And when I read that book, the whole Jesus narrative made sense to me,
Mm.
because he talks about all these things that were miraculous in the Jesus sense. And he's
Non-scientific, I presume. That couldn't
no,
be like
yeah, no, just
explained through any other.
yeah, some
Yeah.
supernatural type stuff. But I mean, miracles are different. Miracles could just be the water I'm drinking. I mean, a miracle is a
Mhm.
perception.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like understanding spirituality, reading this book made sense to me. And it just made the Jesus narrative make sense to me. And then some thoughts about where Jesus was between the ages of 13 and 30 when he showed up back in Jerusalem, because there's a big gap in the
Mm.
scriptures. And there's some evidence that he was actually in India learning how to become a yogi, which makes everything make sense to me. And I'm like, okay. And then one of the lines in Yogananda's book is, you know, Jesus was using Kriya Yoga or something like it, because that's the scientific way to get to God. And he talks about, this special breathing technique called Kriya that helps you to get in touch with that part of you that is already in touch with God.
Mm.
And it all just made sense to me. And so I started meditating regularly, and I started understanding that there is something greater, and it helped me on my mission.
That's great.
Yeah.
Amazing. So
Yeah. I
amazing.
mean,
We'll put the link to that book in the show notes.
yeah, it's
So,
a fantastic book. It's still in print. And that's not to say, like, if you're somebody who doesn't want to believe in spirituality, that's fine. There's no judgment there. You can still get the benefits of meditation by just sitting still and focusing on your breath. If you're somebody who really believes that Jesus is the only way to God, that's fine too. Because
yeah, because people say praying is their meditation. So
yeah, and
that's.
that's fine too. Or if,
Mhm.
personally, my belief is that all roads lead to the same God.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter which it doesn't matter which religion you choose to believe in, all roads lead to the same God.
Mhm.
And that simplifies it for me, and I'm all about simplification.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's just stepping back for a minute and thinking about what we've talked about for the last, 30, 40 minutes. It's like quite a life,
Mm.
quite a life wrapped into one 56-year-old, person body. Yeah. So,
Well, and I
what
just feel like
yeah,
I'm just getting started.
I
I feel like
know. I
I'm
agree.
finally getting, youth is wasted on the young, and I really feel like I'm finally kind of moving into my life's purpose, and I'm going to be able to leave
Yeah.
a legacy and help. The whole idea is to the menopause movement exists to ease the suffering of women who are going through menopause. That is why we're here. And what we don't want is to, we don't exist for people to come and complain about menopause. We
Mhm.
actually show you a way through it so that menopause, managing your menopause doesn't feel like a full-time job. And that is like really what's important. So we offer
Yeah.
world-class transformational education to that
That's
end.
great. That's great. So tell me what you've learned most through this whole entrepreneurial journey that you've
Ah,
taken. And I would like to say too, and give you great kudos, and a lot of people do this, right? Is you juggled both for a long time.
I did. I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And your heart's
it's
always been in this online space.
yeah, so I think one of the main things I learned was that I have to pay attention to my feelings when I'm interacting with somebody. And I learned this as a business owner first, that when you feel like you need to let somebody go, you got to let them go, because they're just going to continue to drag you down. And if somebody doesn't fit, they just don't fit, and that's okay, because you're going to free them up to do something better for themselves, and you're
Mhm.
not going to hold on to them in a resentful way. And so that
And I
was
guess you're speaking to not only a like an employee, but potentially a student, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody
Yeah.
that so if
Acquaintance.
if you're spending, if I'm waking up and you're in my head more than a couple days in a row, probably it's time to let you out of my life.
Yes. So good.
Unless I'm falling in love with you,
Yeah.
which is a completely different story.
Yeah.
But
That feels
and
good.
it's been a long time since I've done that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I've learned a lot about love from my wife, actually. And the fact that love is a lot of acceptance, and there's compromise involved there,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to feel like I'm doing something wrong
Yeah.
all
I
the
love
time.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
And, I'm reading this new book and I ordered it because I was researching abundance, and uh it's called Simple Abundance, and it's
Mm.
every day it's a little story of, I didn't even realize it was a 365 thing, and it is so powerful in the simplicity of what love is, because that's
Yeah.
one of the things is about love and the simplicity of it, and that we neglect loving ourselves more than, and especially women do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we start, I think, at about age 2, we start having separation, right, from our parents, the people that are supposed to be the ones that care for us the most, and we start telling ourselves stories about why that happened. And because I think there's a couple things here. I think because of the narrative that our parents are saying inside their heads, because of the narrative that we're bombarded with through the media, loving yourself is not something that we're ever taught. And we're taught that you have to, girls are, what is it we're supposed to do? We're
Well,
supposed
it's
to
a
submit.
nurturing. We're supposed
Yeah.
to take care of
We're
other
supposed to
people.
nurture and submit.
Yeah.
And when the boys hit us, it means they like us, right?
Oh, yes. Good point.
Yeah, and so we're taught that violence is love, and that's not true. First of all, and if you're listening to this and you think that violence is love, then get some help. But we also don't want to teach our grandchildren now, because most of us have grown children or our children, that when a boy hits a girl, that means he likes her, because that's just not acceptable. And we have to, I just never knew about personal space, and so it took me probably until my 40s to really understand my own personal boundaries after my abuse. So I don't remember the point.
Yeah. Well, I asked you about what you've learned, and the love word came up. And
Yeah.
what made me think about it is, I think through this journey that we're on, then as entrepreneurs, we learn to, I think we start out wanting to give, and then we end up learning more about
Yeah.
ourselves and loving ourselves because, of such the personal growth work we do.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think I've learned the most throughout my journey over the last 3 years has been that there are no truths and nothing has meaning other than what I choose to give it.
Yes.
And that has been so freeing for me. And letting go of outcomes, focusing on process, things like that just really help to propel any project forward. So, running a team, I really enjoy that part of it. The being a leader of a team, I was really worried because I made so many missteps with hiring in the past. And when I finally got a team of people who are really dedicated to this mission and
Yes.
understand why we're here, I mean, the question that everyone asks themselves when they get stuck in my business is, how can I ease the suffering of
Hmm.
my clients and my teammates right now?
Mm. Yeah.
And that's really where we all come from,
Hmm.
is we're here to ease suffering.
Yeah. Which ultimately equals how can I love deeper and
Yeah, I mean, it all
better and
and connect better and all those
yeah.
things, but
Yeah.
the menopause movement is here to ease suffering, and a
Yeah.
lot of women suffer with menopause, and I'll tell you, suffering is an option. It's optional
That's so
everywhere.
powerful. So powerful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. And
Oh,
I'm really
thank you.
excited we finally had this conversation because we've been talking about doing it for a long time.
Right on.
And it's so funny how that kind of the universe knows when the time is right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to let your audience know that if you are interested in trying to understand menopause, or you want to know what menopause is all about, right now you can go to menopausemovement.com/hormones, and that is a course that we offer at no charge right now. We're going to be charging for it soon, so you want to make sure you get in there and you can discover all about menopause, the hormones involved, and what to do about it.
All
It's
right.
called
We'll put that
Understanding
link in
Your
the show
Hormones.
notes for
Yeah,
you.
understanding your hormones and managing your menopause.
All righty.
All
Great.
right.
Thanks
Thanks.
so much for
Thanks.
coming on
Thanks.
and talking. Thank you so much for tuning into the Not Your Average Lives podcast. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe on iTunes if you have an Apple device. You can find free resources and learn what else I have going on at the moment that might interest you on my website at notyouraverage.grandma.com. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook at Not Your Average Grandma. If you liked this episode, it would make my heart so happy if you could leave me a 5-star rating. You can also add a review to let me know what you like about this podcast, which will help spread the word about it to others who need a little midlife inspiration. As always, be you, listen to your inner voice, and focus on reigniting that lost spark so you can start living your own, not your average life.